I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Asbel.
And we want to welcome you again to A Cup of Real. And this episode, we're going to be talking about dealing with trauma. And trauma is a huge word. It's universal. It's used everywhere nowadays. And I was thinking earlier this morning, probably every day, there's probably an article out there that we see go by. There's a post, there's a devotion, there's something about trauma because everybody has dealt with some kind of trauma. And I wanted to look up the definition for trauma, and it says a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. And it made me think of the pandemic.
Oh, we all had trauma with the pandemic.
The pandemic, that was universal, global. And I remember the first part of it, the unknown, the fear, the anxiety. I saw friends, parents, and family members dying quickly. And I remember thinking, I think we even talked about it, are we gonna have another Spanish flu type thing going on here in the beginning, because no one really knew what was going on. But that caused a lot of trauma, a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty in our world. And inside America, we didn't know what to expect.
And I think more than anything, the trauma exacerbated fear.
Yes.
Whether it was the pandemic, but let's take it even more. I mean, with triggers, as we were talking about it, and we had some few people posting as well about, the formal language that we all learned in counseling was their trauma triggers.
Yeah.
And trauma triggers are typically something that is fear-based.
Right.
And so trauma is fear-based responses. And we know that God is not the author of fear. And
Right.
so
Or
that's why we
confusion.
want to talk about trauma.
And I told him earlier, I just feel like it's a great topic because we all have dealt with it. And I remember before the pandemic, it's always been kind of our heartbeat. When I felt to start that women's movement a long time ago, to face our inward issues, face the elephant in the room, face the trauma, deal with it. It wasn't always widely accepted, especially in the religious world, where now, since the pandemic, it's everywhere. And I'm so thankful for that. But I read something this morning and I wanted to read it to you. It says trauma can be associated with loss of faith, diminished participation in religious or spiritual activities, changes in belief, right? Trauma, feelings of being abandoned or punished by God, and then loss of meaning and purpose for living. When you experience trauma, you can feel like you have no purpose. What's my purpose? You know what I mean?
Well, and I think too that when you're dealing with trauma too, oftentimes it's hard to forgive. So depending upon what trauma you went through, whether it was a violation of your personal boundaries, maybe it was some type of trauma event like COVID, someone died.
Grief,
and grief is another indicator of trauma. And it doesn't mean that you can't get through it. It just means you can't stay there.
Right.
And so oftentimes what we have to is when we're faced with trauma is we have to move to the art of forgiveness very, very, very quickly. And we have to move through that process. That
can be really difficult. And I was thinking about this topic. This topic is something I'm very passionate about, so we could do a few of these. But I wrote down a few things that can help us in facing that trauma, because if everybody was facing their past experience and their trauma and really doing it in a healthy way, we wouldn't be living in the constant chaotic, toxic cycles that we see around us and even in our families' lives, because so many times we're suppressing it. We're pushing it under the rug. We're not dealing with it because we think it's easier. It's just going to go away. And I did that a long time ago after the abuse. I thought, oh, I'm fine. I moved out of it. But mentally, I was still there 5 years later.
And it launched itself when we got married. And so
you had to bring that up.
Well, it did. It really did. It came out very quickly, and we had to go into counseling because oftentimes we think we've dealt with it. We made it through, but we didn't do it the way through counseling and actually walking it through a step-by-step process.
And time heals all things. It really doesn't if you don't face it.
No, that's exactly right. Time does not heal all wounds unless you address the wound. And so it will heal wounds if you treat the wound.
Right.
But a wound left untreated just exacerbates other issues as well.
It affects other parts of the body, the mind, the soul, the spirit.
Correct.
But I wrote down a few things, and Asma, you jump in because you'll be with me on all of these. Number one, first off, you got to acknowledge. You have to acknowledge that you've experienced it. because, like I said earlier, many people suppress it.
That's the key point. You have to acknowledge, and until you acknowledge it, you can't acknowledge it for someone else. This is all about you at this point in time.
Right.
And oftentimes we might sometimes see, they're dealing with something traumatic in their life. That response that was triggered. Something happened.
Yes.
And we were talking about this at dinner on Friday night, or a few nights ago, about this with Dr. Octavius Bishop and what have you, is oftentimes we see something it's like, wow, they must have experienced something in their childhood. And yeah, they probably did.
Yeah. It
and
didn't just start.
Right. And that is why the actions are continuing. And this individual that we were discussing. And so it was, but we can't fix that for them.
Right.
Ultimately, you can only deal with your own trauma, your own triggers, and acknowledging it is the first step in anything that you do, not just trauma related, but acknowledging it is the first thing.
The second, which you kind of already talked about, is going to Christian counseling. It's so important to have that outside voice, an objective voice, because I can talk, we need to talk, definitely, but we're biased. We have our own prejudices, you know.
Well, sometimes we're too close.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes it's very important to communicate amongst yourself, but oftentimes you're too close.
Yeah.
So you need someone that doesn't really know you, that's an objective source.
Yes.
We are proponents of Christian counseling just because we are based in the Word and everything that we do is in the Word. But ultimately, you should go to counseling. You need an objective voice speaking into you that doesn't know who you are.
I couldn't agree more. The third one is setting boundaries are a necessity and are very healthy. And you'll start realizing this as you begin to face it, acknowledge it, get counseling, and heal. You're like, okay, I can't do that anymore. I got to set a boundary with that, because that's exasperating what's been going on in my life.
But there's a difference between healthy boundaries and unhealthy boundaries.
And you've had
because I set boundaries, and I can be one way or the other. I'm usually hot or cold. There's not really in the middle with me.
We're not going to talk about it today, but when we first were getting married, talking about it, he had all these deal breakers, and they were extreme. And I said, okay, I don't know what I was thinking, but because some of those things he's eating now, it's not happening anymore.
We'll have to talk about those deal breakers too. But the thing is with boundaries, it was, you can go from not having boundaries to all of a sudden erecting boundaries, and they're more like walls. So they don't let anybody in. And you have a hard, well, I have a boundary. I'm not letting that through, and it wasn't a healthy boundary. So healthy boundaries are extremely important. Again, Dr. Henry Cloud is probably one of the ones that we talk about. Dr. Townsend, Dr. Cloud write a fantastic book on boundaries. Strongly suggest you get that.
I just real quick, I remember when I had moved to DC and I thought I had moved on, but I had a lot of anger in me from abuse. And I remember telling my mom so many times, "I'm never gonna marry again. I hate all men. They're all." She would say, "Your dad is a wonderful man. Was a wonderful man." You know, and I had to eventually eat that, because I married a wonderful man, but not just because you went through trauma with someone doesn't mean everybody's bad in that basket. You know what I mean? There's a few bad apples in every basket.
That is true. And you have to sometimes get the bad apples out, or they'll ruin the entire basket. And that's what we should be focusing on. Is boundaries are kind of removing the bad apples out of the good bunch so they don't spoil. And that is probably the best analogy that we can give you of what a boundary is, and trying to address that. Healthy boundaries say, bad apple, remove bad apple. That's what's really important. And then let that person, whoever it is, you can't control their actions, but if they begin to change, this is where redemption comes in. They begin to change or whatever, then you bring them back in, but their fruit will begin to show. So what happened, whatever it was, will begin to manifest itself of a change. And oftentimes change doesn't happen because we fail to set boundaries.
Right, very, very true. Okay, what else do I have here? Okay, so this is important for me. This has been my lifeline, something my mom and my dad taught me. Prayer for me has probably been the biggest game changer. It has kept me rooted when I felt like running, when I felt like exploding. And I combine that with meditation with the scriptures. Psalm 91, if any of you want something to really savor and marinate in, Psalm 91. Break it down. Go to other versions and break it down. It will minister. It will bless you. It will help heal those deep wounds that you have inside you.
And that I will tell you is that even when we initially got married and we had a lot of struggle, there's been many times that we didn't feel like we were going to make it. on several occasions.
Several.
And had it not been for prayer, had it not been literally for your
My mom.
speaking to you and
Especially
telling you
during that
to get into
one season when
Oh,
I was
yeah.
leaving, and she was like, "Oh no, we'll talk."
And that
about
was
it."
early into
Yeah.
the marriage, and we will talk through that as well. But this is where boundaries come important. This is where baggage comes in that you thought you had suppressed, that you had not. Myself, Stephanie
both brought
included,
it.
we
Yeah.
both brought baggage in. And you think that, oh no, but then things started happening. And that is when the honeymoon is over.
Honey, it was over. But we both had boundaries, but they were unhealthy.
They were unhealthy
extreme.
boundaries. Yeah.
Because we were like, "Oh no, I've been there, never again." You know, we both.
And it was
had
a
that
trigger
attitude.
to trauma.
Yes.
So it was another trauma trigger. Trauma from the abuse that she faced. And so I could have a conversation with her and it triggered a response from old wounds.
Even your tone.
Yeah.
Even the tone. I mean, it was amazing how messed up emotionally I was. Bonnie Marshall, again, I've talked to, she's a psychologist. She helped bring healing to my life. And that was earlier on, and I'm so thankful for that. Because
And my standpoint is there was boundaries for me that just said, oh, I'm not doing that again. We're out of here.
yeah.
And
is
that's not
crazy.
healthy either.
Yeah.
And so those are the type of things that dealing, and we're talking, we're going to be real with you guys. This is a cup of real. This is why we're here talking. If you're facing something similar, you're not alone. The problem is we didn't stay there.
Right.
We started talking to people that spoke life into us. We didn't go start surrounding ourselves with people that thought like we
Pessimistic.
did. Because when they start thinking like you, guess what happens? We probably would have wound up divorced.
Oh, yeah.
But we started talking to people that spoke life into
Have
us.
faith. Yeah.
And they spoke. It's very, very, very important when
Your
you're dealing with
perspective.
trauma, who
Yeah.
you're surrounding, who are those voices speaking into your
It
life.
is so important. We have so many scenarios, which we will talk about in the near future. The other thing that I think is so important that I've done, and I know you become big into this, is journal your journey to healing. Journal those unhealthy, toxic thoughts, but also journal every little baby step that you take. And you're like, you know what? I made it this week and I didn't have a meltdown, or I feel like I'm finally having joy again, or I finally am trusting again. It's so important to journal. I do a lot of online journaling, and it has helped me through the years. And you've been doing
I
that.
started doing it, and that's all her.
Yeah,
Literally, it is all her that told me to start doing that. And I started vlogging.
Mm-hmm.
I started writing. So everything that I write every morning is usually something that I'm either going through, have been, or anticipating to go through. And most people are like, my Lord, that's because I'm talking to myself right
Preaching
now.
to ourselves.
And because we have been raised
Yeah.
that you speak into existence those things that are not. That is what faith is.
Right.
Faith is thinking on those things that we cannot yet see.
Right.
And it is a correlation with trust as well. Stephanie and I were texting each other this morning. Imagine that. She's upstairs, I'm downstairs. We're both writing and doing things. She's testing what she's feeling. I'm like, boy, but we're putting it into writing, because once you start writing it out, you can go back and I can start seeing it. A year from now, I can think, my goodness, with the progress I've made. And I've made more progress on my life's journey by actually writing.
Yeah.
And I give credit to her for telling me to do that. And she probably was raised to do that already.
Yeah.
And my parents were journals or whatever. I just never did it.
It's so
I read a
healthy.
lot,
Yeah.
but the writing part of it wasn't something that just came naturally to me outside of business and work. But it has revolutionized my life.
Even when I lived in DC and I wasn't on my way I wasn't journaling to heal. Because I thought it was okay. I was writing even then. I even wrote a lot of love songs, hate men songs, and I was recording them at the Howard University. I was with all those rappers, remember? And I was all, but it still helped to get it out. Because when you hold things in, it's like a stick of dynamite. You're going to explode down the road. Same with grief.
That's why they tell you when you go through counseling, and we've been through counseling, journal. I now understand the importance of that, and I've been through 15, 16 years of counseling. And it took
You've
me
taken a few breaks.
It took me 12 years to finally get through. Yes, breaks through counseling, but we started when I was 20. I started when I was 28, and I'm 47 now.
Yes.
So it just took a while for me to finally really understand the benefits of writing, journaling and writing.
It's very
writing
healing.
that.
Let's see what else I have here. Now this is, we talked about this, but it needs to be said again, forgiveness. It's imperative. I wrote this down. I won't let pain turn my heart into something ugly.
That's right.
I won't let pain turn my heart into something ugly. And that's what happens when you deal with trauma. You automatically have a wall against that person that, just, I'll never forgive them. They devastated me. They destroyed me. They did this. They did that. But you must forgive.
Today I wrote about that because it just resonated again with me, and it was about forgive. Something popped up, a quote that I had written about a little over 3 years ago on one of my social media platforms, and it wrote up about forgive. It's not for them, it's for you. Yeah. And that really is, once we understand the power of forgiveness, because unforgiveness impacts me. Yeah. And I could have been wronged. There's been many times that I've been wronged. I've wronged others. There has been personal boundaries that have been violated in my life. There's been financial, families done you wrong, colleagues have done you wrong, friends that you thought were your friends have done you wrong. But forgiveness, I can either be unforgiving, let that root get inside me, become bitter, which impacts my entire life, which it did. Yeah. And now it's like, no, let it go. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. My sister sent me a video from someone that does a lot of it called Let Them. And I kind of did a little research on that whole Let Them theory. And there was a poem that was written, and it was like, let them, meaning let them be, let that person, let them be who they are. Remember, you control you. Yeah, you can't. And so now I just say, let them. When something happens and it incites something with me, let them, and I move on. I get rid of a lot of stuff out of my feed. Like sometimes and I just delete it out of my feed because if it's negative and it is inciting an emotion in me, or it is constantly speaking negative thoughts, I can either allow life to speak or death to speak. Right. It's one or the other. It affects you. And it does impact you. What you consume will begin to impact you. Very, very and so I do not let death, anybody that speaks death, I get them out of my news feeds. Get them out of my news feeds. Social media, I don't listen to it. I don't watch it. I don't even let it be around me at a dinner table or whatever like that, because it will take you down a path of negativity. No. Or you can speak life. Cynical. And that is what the scripture says. You're pessimistic about everything.
Let's see what else I have here. Oh, it's actually what you... Stop trying to control everybody and everything. Start letting go of what happened. And it's true. So
let go. Let go and let God. I learned a lot of that with my daughter and all of the addictions that she went through. And I attended a lot of classes for families of individuals that are dealing with addictions, and I learned probably more during those few years than I've learned in 18 years of counseling. And I've learned a lot in counseling, but I learned a lot that I was trying to control things that I could not control. Right. And that is really, really hard for a type A personality, because I can get in there and I can fix things, and you can do this and you can do that. But there's some things that God's trying to teach you is I'm the only fixer. And until you relinquish total control to me, and when I did that, and it took me a while.
Oh. It took a while. The house felt it, trust me.
And that's a whole other story that we'll talk through as well, because this is a concept about trauma triggers, but that is something that forgiveness is probably the biggest thing, and loving and letting go.
Loving and letting go is not always the easiest thing. Okay, well, we kind of talked. I'm done after this. Revisit that place that traumatized you and forgive. Now, that doesn't mean physically always. You can't always go back to that abusive situation, but revisit that place, allow yourself to feel, and then forgive. It kind of goes in with forgiveness. Bonnie Marshall's the one that taught me that, is sometimes it's really important to revisit that place, because when you say it never, you're basically saying, oh, it never happened, I'm fine. But when you acknowledge and revisit that place, then it's easier to forgive.
And I actually went on a journey and did this because of counseling that I went through, and there were some that I just didn't. I just forgave because it was a violation of physical boundaries. But there was a lot of bullying that I endured through high school and through other things. And Stephanie and I went in 2010 on a journey, and we drove drove all the way back, and I went and visited a lot of those spots, and it was amazing the healing process that happened through that process. And so it's not for everyone, but it was something that I needed to do, and it was a journey that I went on, and it was probably one of the most impactful journeys.
I remember that.
That was in 2010.
That was very important to you. I remember that. I have this last quote that I think is powerful. The paradox of trauma is that it has both the power to destroy and the power to transform and resurrect.
That's the power of life and death right there. So you can either take your trauma and you can use it for life, or you can live in your trauma and it will be the death of your purpose, your vision, your dreams, what you want to accomplish.
We all have a choice.
It's a choice. It breaks down to a choice. Well, guys, wow, what a great topic.
And we could probably go on.
What a fantastic topic. But thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for more episodes of A Cup of Real with Stephanie and Asbel.
No fake in our cup going on.
We're trying to, we're gonna try to just be real and talk, and maybe there's something that maybe we're going through right now, or we've been through, that will touch you and give you the ability to get and reach and speak life into that situation. Cannot say that more. If there's one thing that we have learned is speak life. Remove the negative out of your life, because that will transform who you are. Life or death. The power of life and death is in the tongue.
And I'll tell you this, I know we're ending this, but there are times I have had to speak life over my mind. Over my mind, because my mind was, the thoughts were so restless and erratic, and we were going through all this turmoil, through so many things, the addiction, all of that caused a lot of trauma with us too. And I remember so many times my mom would say, speak life over yourself, take control over your thoughts. And I would just say, I speak life, I speak life. God's got this, we're gonna get through this, you just have to speak it.
And you do, and you get through it, and we are through it.
Yes.
And we are we had to change our perspective of the way that we view things, and we had to let go. And I had to. She couldn't make the choices for me. I had to learn them myself, and vice versa. And that's where prayer really came in as well.
Yes.
So thank you for joining us. We're so glad that you joined us for this episode of A Cup of Real.
Yeah. Have a great day.